This is Amy, and you're listening to the Talkin' Appalachian podcast. Hello. I hope you're having a great week. I was thinking about what to podcast on, and I started doing some research on melungeons, and that turned into a snowball. So I had to table that one. So this week, what I'm doing is I'm sharing a word with you that I actually saw on somebody's license plate this morning, and I thought, well, that's a good word to talk about. And then I'm going to pivot to an excerpt from Silas House, my interview with him in season 1, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But let's talk about the word dadgum or dadgummit. If you're from Appalachia, you've probably used this or you've heard it quite a bit. And like I said, I was driving to work this morning and I saw someone had it on their license plate, which I thought was kind of funny. But where does dadgum come from? Well, the Dictionary of American Regional English says that it is a euphemism for a curse word. So instead of cursing, people replace that with dadgummit. So it's kind of a reverse of the GD word, I guess you would say. And it was first recorded in 1905 as dadgum. And then it's recorded in 1912 as dadgummit. So you can put it at the end of it when you're making this exclamation. On the survey, when they asked people the word that they used when they were annoyed or when they wanted to curse, but they didn't want to use a curse word, this was the word they gave. So as an example of that would be, this jar won't come open, dadgummit, or dadgummit, the electric power is off again. So I hadn't thought about that word in a really long time. And when I saw it this morning, I was like, it's alive and well. It's even on cars. In the last episode, we talked a little bit about how people use accent to empower themselves, and I shared an excerpt of Lee Smith's essay in Talkin' Appalachian about that very thing. She talks about how she uses accent when she wants to drive a hard bargain. But then I thought about the other side of this. What happens when you're bullied, right? How do people use their accent to turn it around on those who want to use it to make you feel less than or to make you feel othered? And I think Silas House's essay, In My Own Country, it best describes this, because there's a part of it where he talks about his parents leaving Kentucky and going to work and how people responded to them, but how they actually, in some ways, learned to defeat them, as he says, one word at a time. So I wanted to pull that back out and share that with you because, number one, Silas is one of my favorite people, one of my favorite writers. And number two, I would love for you to hear him read it in his accent because it's beautiful. Let me tell you a little bit about Silas, and then we'll get to the excerpt. He was the Poet Laureate for Kentucky from 2023 to 2024. But before that, he was the New York Times bestselling author of several novels. You might be familiar with Clay's Quilt, A Parchment of Leaves, The Cold Tattoo, the trilogy there. He's got some young adult books, Eli the Good, Same Sun Here, and his most recent is Lark Ascending, and it won the 2023 Southern Book Prize. He's also written for the Washington Post, The Atlantic, Time, Garden and Gun. He was on the documentary Hillbilly, which I have an interview with Ashley York, the director of that documentary, so you might go listen to her interview too. She talks about Silas and his participation. As a music journalist, he's worked with Jason Isbell, Casey Musgraves, Lucinda Williams, Tyler Childers, and many, many more. He teaches at Berea College, and he is the National Endowment for the Humanities chair there. He's also in the Graduate School of Creative Writing. Long and distinguished resume, but Silas has never changed who he is. And so I'm looking forward to resharing this excerpt of my interview with him as he reads his essay from the book Talkin' Appalachian. Have you subscribed to our Patreon page yet? In my latest post for my subscribers, I wrote about my interview with the late Yvette Perdue, a hero of the French Resistance. Captured by the Nazis and imprisoned at Dachau, she escaped to Austria and later found safety in Appalachia. Go subscribe and read about her incredible story of courage and survival, preserved before her passing in 2021. I visited Dachau about 20 years ago, and I describe what it was like to walk through that camp and then talk to Yvette about being there a few months later. I was always interested in helping others, she says. And when you do that, it makes you strong. Read my exclusive photo essay and interview with her now on Patreon. That post is also available for a one-time donation on Patreon, which will be given to Yvette's charity of choice, the Holly Helps Spay and Neuter in Bristol.
My parents left the mountains briefly in the late 60s to find work. There was nothing for us back home except for me to work in the mines or at some gas station, and for your mother to be a waitress, my father explains. So they went north. Two of my paternal uncles had already settled in Hamilton, Ohio, another one to Michigan, and one of my mother's sisters had recently moved to Dayton. They sent back news of good-paying jobs. On their visits home, my aunts chattered about the big department stores and how the schools were so much better and how they had washer-dryer sets up north, while my uncles bragged about bars being on every corner and their newfound ability to own Corvettes. To hear them tell it, it was the promised land. My parents ventured to Flint, Michigan, where they rented a trailer in a little Appalachian trailer park and immediately found jobs with good wages. My father poured concrete on the Flint River Flood Control Project, while my mother built refrigerators at the Gibson plant. My father didn't have trouble up north. He'd had his fair share of discrimination in the Army, where boys who talked like him were singled out as stupid hillbillies. Once, at Fort Hood, Texas, during an alert in the middle of the night, my father had struggled to get his shoes on due to being half drunk and sleepy-eyed. A fellow soldier laughed at him. "What's wrong, hillbilly? Not used to putting on shoes?" My father, remembering how hard his mother had worked to raise him and his 8 siblings alone after my grandfather died, rose up with fists flying. He and the man had fought all over the barrack. Perhaps once he got north, he didn't even hear the put-downs anymore. Or maybe the country-come-to-town gleam was not as bright on him as on my mother. That rural glimmer was only one of the things that shone out from her. She had a natural ability to make friends. She impressed them with her wild tales of having been a driver in the Manchester drag races and with her singing prowess. Before long, everyone was gathered around her during lunch, demanding Laureate Lynn and Brenda Lee songs. "I couldn't eat my lunch for 'em wanting me to sing," she says now. She was surprised that Northerners loved country music so much, but eventually she realized that they were making fun of her, too. The lunchtime group crowded around her while they ate exotic dishes like goulash and mushroom sandwiches. My mother preferred bologna or cans of Viennese sausages, Viennes in eastern Kentucky parlance. And after she sang for them, they asked for another kind of performance. This one girl said she had to watch my mouth when I talked because she couldn't understand what I was saying, my mother tells me, reenacting the way the woman stared at her lips. They'd make me say stuff like aluminum foil and just die laughing. She says, "I picture the factory workers inching closer, all at the same time as if choreographed, studying my mother as if she is a late 60s version of Gertie Neville's. 'What's that shiny stuff you wrap up leftovers in?' one said around the cigarette in her mouth, elbowing a coworker. At the time she smiled and sometimes laughed along with them, but in retrospect she wishes she hadn't. I just wanted to get along and be accepted, my mother says now, not meeting my eyes. Sometimes it made me feel bad, though. I felt like they thought I was dumb just because of the way I pronounced things. In my family back home, we'd always called it aluminum foil. But after they asked me a couple times, I finally learned to pronounce it their way, to not let them win, to not give them what they wanted. At home, though, I said it my own way. My mother had learned to pass. But she knew that there was a way of winning, too. She didn't have to fist fight the way my father had. She could defeat them quietly, one word at a time. My parents moved back to eastern Kentucky after a couple years. When I pressed them on why they returned, they are evasive. "We just missed home too bad," is the standard answer. But I wonder if there was something to the constant attention to their speech that made them miss home worse. Often I picture them driving back home. breathing a sigh of relief once they came to that place on Highway 25 where the mountains were laying out before them, once they found the curves in the road again, once they could close their eyes and breathe in the scent of kudzu or honeysuckle, once they could sit in the middle of a room and be surrounded by people who talked just like them.